Clarity by Dragon's Inn, Chapter 4, Target, Part 2. In contrast to most of Vale's pedestrians who were taking advantage of the beautiful day and security their city afforded them, the visiting Faunus walked through the streets in a fit of anxiety and haste. Although, like a certain huntress, nothing was going in his way today. Ever since he had arrived, one obstacle after another kept cropping up on the way to his destination. The first route was closed off due to madness. The second one had some kind of commission going on, and he could faintly make out the chords of music. Some two-bit pop rock group whose lyrics whined over a crowd more interested in the colorful stalls crowding the thoroughfare. The third had been cut off because of a widespread protest against, of all things, another faunus protest. That one is particular had bothered him, especially when it was clear that the humans at the street fair all but ignored the faunus, simply desired peace. Not that he could fully blame them, if this was how his species acted. His fourth route was once again blocked off by what looked to simply be minor construction, and he was finally forced to consult his scroll for a detour. All the while, the man's paranoia was slowly giving out to his frustration as the clock ticked away. The level of complacency and incompetence in the city was ridiculous. Surely it was almost like he stopped dead in his tracks as his mind began racing faster than his feet. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that with every change his route had become more and more convoluted. Every turn was actually taking further away from where he wanted to go. It was all laid out there on his scroll, a labyrinth path that lazily spiraled inwards with him now at the center of the bullseye. He was being steered. Frantically, he looked around at all the people around him. At the moment, he was in the plaza, and the place was bustling with people on their way to their own destinations. No way to tell which, if any, had been following him. He was just going around in circles. He didn't have time to waste on them. He was too busy trying to figure out who. Then his eyes landed on her. While he couldn't quite be sure, as there wasn't anything to decry her as extraordinary, she was airily skipping through the streets, only vaguely heading in his direction, but could have just as easily been going to any number of shops, even to meet up with those four girls he had seen. Yet he had seen her everywhere. He hadn't been paying attention at the time, but as his mind went into overdrive and replayed the recent snapshots of his journey, he became sure of it. She had been there every time his route had to change. In all honesty, he wouldn't have noticed her even then. Dever was the most suspicious of people by nature, but his paranoia had been rising since the day he committed himself to do this, to come to Vale and confess. His fear, his guilty conscience, had possibly saved his life. But then he looked up at the girl and gulped as her eyes met his. Maybe his fear had just delayed the inevitable long enough for him to be fully aware of what was about to happen. Those cold eyes did not match that warm, cheerful smile on her face, and promised a very grim fate for what had been a beautiful day. Animal instinct kicked in. A fight or flight, he chose the obvious and turned around to run for his life, but found that he simply couldn't. The very instincts that were urging him to flee were also freezing him up. Overwhelmed in awareness, he now felt multiple eyes upon him, eyes that exercised his very soul. He was going to die. That was the only logical conclusion he could come to, for even as fear had fully taken a hold of his body, his mind remained cruelly sober. Thus, it was no surprise to him that when he collapsed onto the ground in a ball, bullets rang out in the air. He just didn't expect to be alive to hear it. Clarity. What the hell is happening? Hearing but not seeing the gunshots echoing over the buildings and into the alleyway in which they were hiding, Namikuji barked into the comms and awaited the milliseconds to an answer. The White Fang has attacked the city, Kitsune answered almost disappointedly as he watched the people in the streets begin to panic. Fuck! Lonan exclaimed as the listeners all winced. Why the hell weren't we told about this being a possibility? It's likely our intelligence didn't know, Arrow guessed clinically. Lack of info was the issue which brought us on board on the first place. Plus, White Fang attack patterns have changed up in the last couple of months, making them fairly unpredictable. That's no help. With a combination sigh and shrug, China herself had all but expected complications to arise even before they heard about their additional team. Mission goes on. Whatever. Growling, Neela dodged the throngs of people running in the opposite direction as she kept a beady crimson eye on the bull faunus. I still have a clear strike for the target. Flexing her fingers, her intricately painted and sharpened nails appear to grow in anticipation. The poison mixed with purple polish glistening through the sweat of the panicked crowd. Make it look like an accident. Unperturbed, the weasel instructed as he watched from a roof nearby. From his vantage, clearly picking out the two swimming upstream. Roger, Roger, Nilla quipped playfully as she swam towards her target. Sorry, we can't make it quick. A sincere apology echoed in her head, yet there was still a bloodthirsty grin on her face. But it has to look like an accident. Nails clacking in contrast to her silent footsteps, she neared the man who was being jostled by the people trying to flee the terror. He looked up from his own debilitating panic to see a mask staring at him. Then he saw the other five faces, demons painted on the five menacing points, waggling at him. Fear filled his eyes as they approached, and he closed his eyes, waiting for the cackling monster to tear him apart and take him to hell where he belonged. Only he felt nothing. Can't let you do that. Changing to open his eyes, the man looked up in disbelief to see someone standing between him and his would-be killer. Nila hummed in disappointment as she felt her fingers scream in agony and frustration. The newcomer's battle axe now sported five parallel marks, but the demons painted on her nails were weeping tears of blood. The huntsman had arrived. Sorry, but this bloke hired us to keep him alive. The man smirked in confidence as he blocked Nila's attempt assassination and through his massive legs, the intended target began crawling away and disappearing into the chaos of the streets. From behind her mask, which sported the serene countenance of a multi-faced god, Nilla didn't say a word. She simply clicked her tongue in frustration at the situation. This was not supposed to happen. Damn terrorists! Clarity. From her position near Itachi, Nan growled and withdrew her Tetsubo in preparations to help her captain. She wouldn't get the chance. Well, what do we have here? With the groan of having to endure such a cliched line, Lauren turned around to see a plucky, brightly hued young woman spinning two swords in her hands. Another huntress. The target had hired a team. We've been compromised, Nilla broke in calmly through the comms. I can fucking see that, Nolan seethed as she eyed her new opponent. She gnawed her teeth and wrung her iron-studded bat in her hands as she anticipated bashing out this pretty little princess smile. Actually, that was a real question. I can tell if you're a boy or a girl. The huntress squirmed as she eyed the androgynous assassin up and down. Both Lauren and her rage froze at the statement. Well, if you are a girl, then I feel kind of bad. They have surgery for that kind of thing, you know. Not that I've ever needed it. Shrugging, the huntress incredulously floundered her own assets. But don't worry, I'm sure there are guys out there that type. That was it. Mission unknown. This bitch was gonna die. Clarity. Ducking under a swing from the man, Nilla threw a few shuriken his way, but he moved to the side and let them sail past, not bothering to cover his blind spots. Seeing his confidence, some would say arrogance, she could also hear the distinct sounds of combat and knew what that meant. She wasn't alone, but neither was she. Tall and stout, China and Fairer landed equally gracefully next to her as they eyed the huntsmen beyond their own masks of a bear and a horse. As they watched unblinkingly, he was joined by his own two companions. The huntsmen were stronger, Nilla could tell just by looking at them, the way they carried themselves and moved like the apex predator they were. Unlike with Team 7, there was no shame in admitting this disparity. Unlike their fellow assassins, the huntsmen were older, more experienced. If this fight got drawn out, then they would lose eventually. Time was also running out, their target was getting away, and there was no way they would find him if he disappeared again. At least, not like this. So what should she do? I have eyes on the target. Her answer came in the form of Kitsune. Clarity. I have eyes on the target, Kitsune said in the calm, ignoring the impending confrontation and focusing on the squirming form of the fondest man. We can take him out. If you have a chance, then take it, Nilla instructed, already feeling it was unnecessary, but also knowing Kitsune wouldn't usurp her leadership without her explicit order. Use your own discretion, but see if you can lead him into an alley or something first. With the panic, we can still get out of this without compromising our existence even more, she continued. My team will keep the do-gooders busy. I'll provide backup for Team Shiva. Weasel spoke, taking stock of the situation and all but an instant and making the call. Kitsune, take point. Understood, he responded, and breathed hint of eagerness in his voice, which have been disregarded as stoic. Let's move. And they were off. Clarity. Not as panicked as the people around them, Ruby looked around in concern as she and her team got separated amidst the helter skelter. People were running around in an aimless panic away from the gunshots, which now seemed to be coming from multiple directions and confusing their fight. Ruby looked on as people pushed and shoved each other to get away from the attack, not caring that they hurt each other in the least. They were like animals. Among their chaos, she even saw a honest man crawling on the dirt ground, trying desperately to get away. She watched as people began trampling on him. Hey! Her altruistic instinct kicked in. Ruby began pushing through the crowd to get to the man with the aid of her semblance. When she finally reached him, she plucked him from the human tide and dragged him to a building and sat him against the wall. Are you okay? She asked, leaning over the hyperventilating man as he looked around frantically. You have to help me! Still wiping his neck back and forth, he seemed to ask this of anyone willing to listen. They're here for me. Who is? Ruby asked, holding the man's shoulder, trying to calm him down. She meant it in a constituent way, but betwixt the urgency and her own sinking suspicion, it somehow came out as a demand. The they're going to what? Ruby pressed, though she had a horrible feeling she already knew the answer. Who's coming for you and why? Then she felt it, the piercing gaze that bore into the back of her head. No, they weren't looking at her, they were looking through her. Slowly she turned around and glanced up at the roof of a nearby building, as if she knew exactly where it was and were a distance away, but Ruby could see it as it existed in darkness. Nightmares. The black mask of the kitsune was plain as day, his eyes emptier than the blue sky behind them, were clearly upon her. She could tell even behind those inciting slits. Too late, Ruby realized what the man was trying to say. "They're here to kill me!" End of chapter 4.